everybody. I realized that the last couple weeks I have not been introducing myself, and that would suggest that nobody new ever watches these, and I hope that's not true. So I'm AnnaLee Dragon. I am the director of the Kinderhook Memorial Library, and I've been doing these book talks since the beginning of the quarantine, which was in March, forever ago. And so each week I kind of come on and just give you some ideas of different topics, books I liked, give you some different ideas to explore. So I hope that you're enjoying them if you've been watching, and if you're new, welcome. So this week I wanted to focus on the idea of maybe lesser known pieces of history. So I read a lot of nonfiction, which, for those of you who aren't big nonfiction fans, I would just say that great nonfiction reads like fiction. A good book is a good book. So if you haven't tried any nonfiction, you just need the right one. That's my opinion. So I have picked some of my favorite nonfiction about pieces of history that, as I read the books, I thought, how did I never know about this? I've been to college and graduate school and I never heard any of this stuff. So there's just so much to know, right? So I thought I'm just going to look off to the side occasionally to look at my notes. So don't think I'm not paying attention to you. I thought I would start out with one that a friend recommended to me called Blitzed by Norman Ohler. I am going to put clips of all of the covers at the end of this. So if you don't catch an author or a title, don't worry. Just watch the video to the end and you will see the covers of all of the books I'm discussing. So Blitzed is about Nazi Germany in the Third Reich during World War II, and the fact that much of Germany, including the army, were on methamphetamines during the war, which is, it got the title Blitzed, the book, from the Blitzkrieg across the south of France. And everybody always kind of wondered how these men marched for so many days without stopping and eating. And it's because they were on drugs, given to them by their superiors. It was, of course, had more of a pharmaceutical name at the time, but it was methamphetamine. And so at the time, they kind of thought, oh, we don't see any downsides to this, which obviously came to fruition at some point. But they, for a while, were able to just go like machines. And it was because they were being given these drugs, which, set you off into hyperactivity and with very little sleep and very little to eat. So it was just this fascinating piece of history that I thought, I never heard anything about that. And it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. But it's just something that the Third Reich had this, motto of like cleanliness and purity. And so it kind of goes counter to all of that. But just a really great book, really interesting, and a different viewpoint for those of you who are interested in World War II. The next book I wanted to touch on was The Library Book by Susan Orlean, which I don't know if any of you have read. It was very popular a few years ago, but it's about the Los Angeles Public Library when it burned down, which happened in the 80s. It's still the single largest library fire ever in the United States. Huge tragedy in a lot of ways. But the thing was, it was eclipsed because it was the same day as Chernobyl. And so all of the news sources were covering Chernobyl, and they didn't really cover this horrendous thing that happened. And there's actually like a true crime kind of twist to it, because they think it was arson and they thought they had the person. And there's like a lot of information about that, but there's also information of the whole history of the Los Angeles Public Library, its leadership, the people who worked there, how they recovered from the fire, techniques they used to save the books, just a lot of really interesting stuff that I had never heard about. And if you're wondering why, it's because of the Chernobyl coincidence, which then the other great thing about books like this is then that led me to read more about Chernobyl. For some reason, Chernobyl felt a lot longer ago than the 80s to me. So then I read a whole bunch of books about that. So one thing leads to another, and that's always good. The next book I wanted to touch on is Mrs. Sherlock Holmes. It is by Brad Ricca. And so this is about a female lawyer and detective in 1917 who solved a cold case of a murder of an 18-year-old girl. But she was really amazing. Like, this woman that is the focus of the book was sort of an oddity in that she was the only woman that was really doing anything in detective work, in police work, in being an attorney, because it was 1917. So women weren't given the same opportunities a lot of times. And she went on to become the first female U.S. district attorney. So there's some true crime in it for the murder mystery lovers. And there's also some really great history about this woman who, there's so many people to remember that you don't always hear about everybody. And this was a really fascinating story to me, particularly as a woman. I really enjoyed reading about her and what gumption it must have taken for her to kind of insert herself into this world that wasn't really welcoming of her at the time that she was doing it. So great read, highly recommend. The next two actually kind of speak to my love of sort of adventure-y fiction. I'm an armchair adventurer. I don't like to actually necessarily go and do all of these things, but I love reading about them from the comfort of my couch. So the first one I wanted to mention was The Lost City of the Monkey God by Douglas Preston. This one has kind of all of the stuff that you love about an Indiana Jones movie. It is a lost city. There is a supposed curse. There's treasure. It's in South America, in the jungle. There have been people who've supposedly, this city has been written about forever in mythology, but nobody's ever actually historically been able to locate it and identify it. One person found it, but then died of an illness before they could identify it and locate it. And so then enter modern day technology and LiDAR, which is a kind of sonar that is used where they fly above the jungle and they bounce down radio waves. And depending on the height of the floor and the trees, it bounces back and it kind of gives them a topographical map. And this has enabled them to really locate a lot of ruins in the middle of the jungle, which they haven't been able to locate otherwise because it's so dense and there's so much of it. And so it's about them locating the city. So it's, like I said, it's got all of the marks of a true adventure story, but it's real. And I found it completely fascinating. And you may know Douglas Preston. He's written a bunch of kind of adventure-y sort of books that are fiction, but this is a nonfiction one. So if you're looking for like a little escapism these days, check that one out because it was great. And then the last one I wanted to talk about is In the Heart of the Sea. It's the story of the whaleship Essex, and it was written by Nathaniel Philbrick, who's won a lot of awards as an author. He's fantastic. His writing is excellent. His research is impeccable. And this book is really fascinating because it's the story of the whaleship Essex, which for those of you who don't know, is the basis for the story Moby Dick, which is a great, well-known novel in the literary canon. I gotta admit, not my favorite. I read it for a course in college, kind of because I had to, and didn't really enjoy it very much, found it very slow moving. So when I saw this book, I kind of thought, I wonder, and I picked it up and I could not put it down. The truth was so much more interesting to me than the fiction was. These men, they had their boat rammed by a whale and they survived out in the ocean in tiny little dinghies for 90 days. They're until they managed to float the thousands of miles back to shore. It was incredible. There was also a lot of information about the history of whaling in this country, which again, knew nothing about. The Native Americans used to be able to hunt whales from the shore. There were so many of them. And then, of course, we as human beings did what we do. And, we colonized and then overfished, basically. And they would have to go out on these long whaling journeys for years at a time. And it got so that what they would do was process the whales at sea and just bring back barrels of oil and blubber because the journeys were so long. But that meant that there were generations of kids who grew up to be whalers who, when they went out on that boat for the first time, had never seen a physical whale, had no idea what one looked like because all that came back were the barrels. So just imagine that for a minute. And they're hunting them with harpoons and spears. And these are some of the biggest creatures on the planet. Just some really fascinating history to go along with this harrowing adventure story. And unbelievably, some of these men who survived this ordeal did sail again. You would never get me on a boat again after what they went through. But many of them, that was the only livelihood they had. And so they did get back onto a sailboat at some point, which blew my mind. So those are some of my favorite, lesser known maybe pieces of history. Maybe I am not as educated and some of you already know all about all of these things, but I did not. And I think even if you did know about these, and let me know, because maybe I have some other suggestions that are ones that you don't know as much about, because I just think, there's so much to know out there and so little time. So why not be entertained and learn something at the same time? I think that's like the best of both worlds. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to now put up pictures of all of the covers so you can go hunt down these books that are in our system or online. And then I hope to hear from you. I am hearing from some of you that you're enjoying the talks, and I really appreciate that. It's very nice to know I'm not talking to myself. So definitely let me know what you think, and go have an adventure and learn something. It's going to be fantastic. It's a great way to have a staycation since we're all kind of stuck at home this summer. So I will look forward to speaking with you next week.